Welcome to Dataless You. I'm Paul, coming to you from Brooklyn. Today we are going to take a look at the short story Why Don't You Dance by Raymond Carver. I'll be reading from his selected stories, Where I'm Calling From. The story appears on page 155. Let's get started. First, a little bit about Raymond Carver. He was born in 1938 in Oregon, died at the young age of 50 in Washington State. You can read the rest here. We're going to take a close look at his story, Why Don't You Dance, which was first published in 1978. There's a photograph of the young Carver. And here we can look at just a few of the marks of Carver. The settings are singular, 60s and 70s, always on the West Coast. That's California, Oregon, and Washington. We're going to pay close attention to his style. Carver wrote with great brevity and intensity, and that's a quote of his. He's known for his minimalism, his dirty realist style, and also his tip of the iceberg storytelling approach, which we're going to pay particular attention to today. You can peruse the motifs and themes and types of characters that are common to Carver here. So, the iceberg theory of fiction. And the idea is, I believe that both the iceberg theory of fiction and a certain dirty realist prose style have dominated American fiction for over half a century now. And so I'd like to take a close look at that today and how it operates in Carver's story, Why Don't You Dance? The idea originated with Ernest Hemingway, who was influenced by his work in journalism. And the idea is that to tell a good story, to strengthen a story, you omit needless details, and in fact, you omit much of the story, much of the backstory, and you focus on just the tip of the iceberg, so to speak. The result was a minimalist style, a lot of short declarative sentences that you find in Hemingway as well as Carver later. It has been argued that this approach creates a certain distance between the author and his characters. And my argument here today is that Carver's Why Don't You Dance is essentially his version of Hemingway's The End of Something, which was published in 1925 and is a part of Hemingway's famous Nick Adams stories. The End of Something is set in Horton Bay, Michigan, and it's also, it's the story of a boy and girl breaking up. But all we see in the story is the two of them taking a boat out on the lake, fishing, and then setting up camp, and then essentially the boy says it isn't fun anymore, and the girl gets it. After a brief conversation, she says, well, I'll take the boat home, and you can walk around the point later. And he says, oh, well, I'll help you push out, and she says, no, you don't need to. So instantly they're broken up, and the girl shows a kind of great maturity and self-possession. She doesn't need his help. She'll take the boat home. She'll walk away with a kind of calm and poise. And the boy is left, and he casts his head in his hands and is rather distraught. And even though he planned the breakup, as we see when his friend Bill comes a moment later and says, well, how did it go? So it was obviously planned prior to their boating outing. Even though he planned it and executed it, he is the one who's sort of depressed and a mess at the story's end. And we'll see how Hemingway's The End of Something foreshadows all that we see in Carver's story. There's the young Hemingway, probably at the young age when he came up with his iceberg theory. And he even wrote an essay about it. And here's the theory in his own words. If a writer of prose knows enough of what he is writing about, he may omit things that he knows, and the reader, if the writer is writing truly enough, will have a feeling of those things as strongly as though the writer had stated them. The dignity of movement of an iceberg is due to only 1/8 of it being above water. A writer who omits things because he does not know them only makes hollow places in his writing. So the idea is the writer must know everything that is omitted. The writer must have all of these details in his mind, and if so, then they'll be felt in the reader. and that a story with the iceberg theory will move with the great dignity of an immense iceberg, even though we only see the tip. So now let's turn our attention to Why Don't You Dance by Raymond Carver, which originally appeared in a literary journal in 1978 and then was published in 71 in his collection What We Talk About When We Talk About Love. The story essentially is in three parts. We get a detailed symbolic description of the scene, which is a kind of yard sale, a kind of creepy yard sale, as we'll see in just a moment. And then there's a fair bit of dancing and drinking and wheeling and dealing as items on the yard are sold to a girl and boy who stumble upon the scene. And then the story ends with a kind of frame, the girl retelling the story to her friends. So let's look at the opening paragraphs. Again, I'll be reading from where I'm calling from, the collected stories, and I'm on page 155. In the kitchen, he poured another drink and looked at the bedroom suite in his front yard. The mattress was stripped, and the candy-striped sheets lay beside two pillows on the chiffonier. Except for that, things looked much like the way they had in the bedroom. Nightstand and reading lamp on his side of the bed, nightstand and reading lamp on her side. His side, her side. He considered this as he sipped the whiskey. So, instantly, as we look at a fuzzy picture of a yard sale, we have the iceberg theory. His side, her side, emphasized in a single paragraph, sort of encapsulating all that has come before. And Carver, here's a more iconic image of Raymond Carver. Carver here is implying that much has come before. Much history, probably much joy and happiness, but also much suffering. We have the chiffonier out front, a rattan chair, a table, a potted fern, a record player, a television set, a coffee table, curtains with cups, glasses, and plates, etc. And the strange part, though, is that, quote, things worked, no different from how it was when they were inside. So via extension cord, all the lamps and the television and everything is plugged in and operational, and it's all set up as if it were still inside. It's as if the man in the story has sort of brought his private life out into the public and sort of recapitulated the inside or the inner life of the house out on the front yard, as if to show that it is now dead and frozen and lost to time. The story continues with a section break and then this line, quote, it must be a yard sale, the girl said to the boy. And so we have boy and girl. It's kind of classic young boy meets young girl, and they're newly and freshly in love, and here they come, encountering this creepy middle-aged man who's dragged all of his things out onto the front yard and is drinking out in public and is sort of wallowing in his woe for all to see. And so we have a juxtaposition between new, fresh love and broken, old love. Love come undone. Anyhow, the boy and girl kind of go through the things, and they're curious about what they can get. And she says, "Kiss me," from the bed as she lies on the bed. And he says, "Let's get up," the boy. And she says, "No, kiss me." And so there's again this sort of fresh romantic feel between these two. Then the man comes down the sidewalk. He's got a sack of sandwiches and beer and whiskey. And they begin bargaining. And the girl shows self-possession here in this story. So again, as the girl in Hemingway's The End of Something, the girl here in Carver's Why Don't You Dance is the sort of mature one. She's a good bargainer. She gets $10 less for the bed. She goes, "Would you take 40?" And the guy says, "I'll take 40." And she gets $10 less for the TV. "Would you take 15? 15's okay." "I could take 15, the man said. And here they go on. Drinking, pouring whiskey, getting fairly drunk. There's a moment when the man looks at the two, the boy and girl. Quote, he looked at them as they sat at the table In the lamplight, there was something about their faces. It was nice or it was nasty. There was no telling. An interesting line about the inability to read another person, the inability to ever accurately see what's going on. Anyhow, the man says everything goes. They continue to drink and make deals. And finally, Carver writes, quote, "Why don't you kids dance?" he decided to say. And then he said it. "Why don't you dance?" "I don't think so," the boy said. "Go ahead," the man said. "It's my yard. You can dance if you want to." So again, this sense of the man having brought all of his private life out into the open, and his still kind of believing that it's his private life. You know, it's my yard. You can dance. You can do whatever you want to out here. So now they're drinking and dancing. First the boy and girl, and then the girl invites the man to get up and dance. And I want to read this part of the story in its entirety. And really, we're at the very end. So notice, the entirety of the story only takes maybe about an hour as they make their deals and drink and dance. And so that's the 1/8. That's the tip of the iceberg that we're seeing. "Those people over there, they're watching," she said. That's the girl. "It's okay," the man said. That's the older man. "It's my place," he said. "Let them watch," the girl said. "That's right," the man said. "They thought they'd seen everything over here. But they haven't seen this, have they?" he said. He felt her breath on his neck. "I hope you like your bed," he said. The girl closed and then opened her eyes. She pushed her face into the man's shoulder. She pulled the man closer. "You must be desperate or something," she said. So, encapsulated here in these lines are, first, the iceberg theory. I love the line, "They thought they'd seen everything over here." It implies a world of history, of fights, of screaming, of late nights, perhaps of really everything that had happened in that household that we, the reader, haven't seen, but we certainly feel. And then we have this kind of intensity in the dance between the young girl and the older man. He felt her breath on his neck. There's that kind of electric sexuality in this moment. He says, "I hope you like your bed." And then she pulls the man closer to her as her sort of younger boyfriend is sort of all drunk and, you know, half asleep on the bed. And then she says, "You must be desperate." And then we have that sense, is he? Well, I think so. We're certainly seeing his rather immature reaction to his breakup and frankly his rather sad and desperate scene here out in the front lawn. The story closes with an interesting 2 paragraphs. It's that part 3, it's the frame. The girl is trying to recapture what happened as she sits maybe over drinks telling her friends. Quote, "Weeks later," she said, "the guy was about middle-aged. All his things right there in his yard. No lie. We got real pissed and danced. In the driveway. Oh my God, don't laugh. He played us these records. Look at this record player. The old guy gave it to us. And all these crappy records. Will you look at all this shit?" She kept talking. She told everyone. There was more to it, and she was trying to get it talked out. After a time, she quit trying. And there the story ends. Again, we get a sense there was more to it. And the girl, like us, like the readers of the story, are perhaps trying to really figure it out. What happened there? How did this man end up in such a state, in such a scene? So, just to recap, let's look at the similarities. Both "Why Don't You Dance" and "The End of Something," which I summarized earlier, are tip of the iceberg breakup stories. They both highlight the emotional immaturity of the man in the story, who is, in his own way, suffering the breakup badly. Each opens with a detailed symbolic description. So for Carver, it's that detailed description of the yard sale, of everything set up just so. plugged in and working. And for Hemingway, The End of Something opens up with a description of the town of Horton Bay, Michigan, which was once a great lumbering town and now is a dusty ghost town as the lumbering business has fallen off. Each story ends with a curious framing device. For Carver, it's the girl retelling the story. For Hemingway, it's when Nick's friend Bill walks up and asks how the breakup went. And we see that in this moment, Nick can't really handle the company. And he's distraught and desperate, just like our man in Why Don't You Dance? And I would argue that each of these stories share a certain dignity of movement. In each of them, you really feel that 7/8 of the iceberg under the water. Maybe even it's 15/16 of the iceberg sort of surging and moving ever so slowly beneath just this tip, just this moment that we, the reader, are privileged to see. So, the takeaway is that I think, in my experience, I've seen that fiction in America has been largely dominated for more than half a century by the brutal combination of the iceberg theory of storytelling and the dirty realist prose styles of both Hemingway and Carver. Each of them writes, as we've discussed, just showing a moment in time that implies so much more symbolic meaning, structural, and the very history of the story itself. And in trying to accomplish this, they both developed a style that's very direct. It was called dirty realism or minimalist. In fact, each famously edited their stories down and sort of strove to cut certain percentages of their prose away, leaving just the sort of bare bones facts, which to each of these writers really meant the truth. So that brings us to the end of this video as we look here at an image again of Raymond Carver. I would encourage you to pick up some of his other stories, such as Cathedral or Fever, one of my favorites, or Are These Actual Miles? Each brilliant stories in their own right, and you could observe how this iceberg theory of fiction is employed by Carver, and also how in later stories he does grow and mature as a writer into a more elaborate, full, poetic style. But for now, that's all. I hope you have enjoyed this video. As always, thank you for joining me, and I will see you in the future.